Okay, so multicellular life cycles. So first off, in a multicellular life cycle, we have what we know as a germ cell. Germ cells are typically diploid cells and are in the reproductive organs. They're going to be the cells in your body that are going to go through meiosis to form your haploid gametes. They always start out diploid and then they go through the processes of meiosis. Remember, it's PMAT1 and PMAT2. And then they're going to form a haploid gamete. Gamete is either sperm or egg. Now these haploid gametes are going to then be able to fertilize. An egg is going to be fertilized by a sperm through random fertilization to form a zygote. A zygote will then travel through the fallopian tube and embed itself into the uterus. It'll start then going through cell division, and it will be able to form an embryo. An embryo will be able to grow to form a fetus, and then it grows into what we know as a baby. And so a zygote is the starting process of pregnancy. That, in a diploid life cycle, meiosis in the germ cells of multiple or multicellular organisms, such as us, will result in the formation of these haploid gametes. Now, we have two processes of this diploid thing. With these gamete formations, we have our male and our female. So let's talk about the males. Spermatogenesis is what males go through. It's the process of forming sperm or making sperm. So their germ cells are going to divide in spermatogenesis to form 4 sperm, which are haploid, or half the genetic information. The sperm that form are all viable, so that means they're all usable sperm. And they'll develop a tail, or what we know as a flagellum, to allow for locomotion or movement. Now, males will go through spermatogenesis trillions of times, forming millions of sperm. Every time a male ejaculates, they'll have millions of sperm within that semen. And a semen is just a liquid substance that lowers the pH level of the female reproductive organ so that the sperm are able to survive, because they're not typically able to survive within the uterus. Now, spermatogenesis is actually really important to note that males will go through this from the time of puberty to almost the time of death, unless something occurs within their body, such as a damage to the testes or a vasectomy or something like that. But spermatogenesis will actually form that viable sperm trillions and trillions of times, forming millions and millions of sperm every single day for males. Females is not the same. We go through oogenesis. And now a female is born with a portion called an ovary. An ovary holds the eggs. Eggs held within the ovary are actually underdeveloped, and they are the only eggs that the female will have for her entire lifetime. She will not make more eggs. What she is born with is what she has. Every 28 days, an egg will develop to form a viable egg that will go through. Now, when a female goes through meiosis, they start with a germ cell. The germ cell will divide to form 4 haploid cells. However, only one of those haploid cells is called an egg. The egg will actually take in more of the cytoplasm than the other 3. And the egg is what will be then fertilized by the sperm. The other 3 are known as polar bodies. Polar bodies will be reabsorbed by the female. The polar body has the same half of the genetic information, but it has less of the cytoplasm. And the cytoplasm is important for that first cellular division and to help to support the embryo, which will come later on. Now, a polar body can be fertilized. However, if it is fertilized, the zygote will actually be terminated very quickly because it doesn't have enough cytoplasm to allow for the cell division to occur. Because remember that one egg is going to divide to form 2 cells. Then those 2 cells divide to form 4. Those 4 divide to form 8, 8 to 16, and we keep going on until we have an entire offspring formed. So you have to realize that there's not enough cytoplasm, the embryo won't be viable. And so the zygote will actually be absorbed by the body. So for females, they will go through this process in utero to meiosis to form these eggs, and that's oogenesis. The eggs will then develop or ripen. One will be released hopefully every month from the time that they start ovulation, which is at the beginning of puberty, until the time they stop ovulation, which is a period called menopause. So females will only produce eggs for a very short period of time in comparison to how long males can produce sperm. And males will produce new sperm their entire lifetimes. Females are born with all of the eggs that they will ever produce within their life. Now, there's millions of eggs in there, but still, it's all the eggs that you're going to produce in your life. So now we have haploid life cycles. Haploid life cycles are typically found with organisms that will go through asexual reproduction and may have sexual reproduction. So fungus and protists are two kingdoms that will go through these haploid life cycles. And so with these haploid life cycles, again, half of the genetic information, especially with fungus, there isn't really a male or female. So the haploid life cycle, the meiosis in a diploid zygote, results in the formation of the first multicellular haploid individual. And so the haploid, or asexual reproduction, this one end that you see here, will then fuse to form a 2N or diploid cell. This diploid cell will then go through meiosis, forming more haploid cells. Now, the fusion of these two diploid cells, they're not a fusion of two gametes to form a zygote. It's still called a zygote, but the formation is actually a positive and negative. And so with fungi, we have this thread-like material called a hyphae, which will come in contact with another one. They're not male or female, they're positive and negative because they're gender neutral. Once they touch each other, they will then fuse. Those cells at the end that fuse will form a diploid cell. That individual diploid cell will go through meiosis to form 4 haploid cells, which can then go and live their life cycle and go through asexual reproduction. And when they come in contact with another haploid cell and fuse together, they will then go through meiosis again. Now, the reason for this is they need to find some genetic variation within the population to make the population successful. These species, such as fungus and protists, don't really need to change that much. Then we have alteration of generations. This occurs in plants and most multicellular protists. And I say multicellular protists because most people don't realize algae are protists, not plants. And so they have a life cycle that alternates between this haploid life cycle and a diploid life cycle. And they call that the alteration of generation, which means sometimes they're going to reproduce sexually, and sometimes they're going to reproduce what we know as asexually. So these in plants, a multicellular diploid phase is called a sporophyte, and they form spores, kind of like what you would see on a fern. And the spores form gametophytes. A gametophyte is part of the haploid phase, and that produces gametes by mitosis, and then the gametes give rise to the diploid phase. And so basically, when they form these haploid sporophytes, so sporophytes will then form gametophytes, and these gametophytes will then fertilize to form a gamete, will then form the gametes that make our zygote. And so this is really important to understand. Plants will go through this quite often. It allows for an individual to live within a specific system. And so they'll go and alterate between a sporophyte and gametophytes. And so you do have some plants, though, that are self-fertilizing that will produce both male and female organs. You have other plants that will only be strictly female or strictly male and have to be fertilized that way. And then we have plants like our ferns, which will only produce spores during their life cycle. Okay, so you guys are going to be doing some lab next week to emphasize this, and I will see you next week.